Hi, I'm Andrew Malloy, the Automation Wizard, and today I'm going to go through what I think are the top reasons to actually choose Obsidian. And these are basically the biggest reasons that I'm using Obsidian and actually moved away from other kind of second brain personal management type tools, personal knowledge management tools, such as Roam and Notion. I was actually using those for quite a lot of things, and I was finding use from both of them because they kind of approach things in different ways. And I've basically replaced both those tools with Obsidian for now. I have some of the videos on how I've adapted my workflow to match what I was doing in Notion and Roam research as best I could. But these are the main reasons that even the places where I found there were still some things better in Notion or was cost. Roam research and Notion, they have free versions, obviously, and the free versions do seem to be getting better. But I felt like to get past the limits, I paid for the actual professional or higher level tiers of those. And Drone Research felt like it was getting quite expensive for how much I was using it anyway. And Notion. And subscription fatigue is a real thing. One of my motivations was to actually cut down on the number of subscriptions I have. And so cost, it's a legitimate reason. And so the cost of Obsidian, it's free. There's no limits at all with the free version. As you can see on the Obsidian page, they have a pricing page, and that's for basically if you're using it for commercial purposes, there's a commercial license. Everything else is effectively just to support the developers. There's no set of Obsidian, and you can donate to or pay the developers as much or as little as you want through their Catalyst payment. You also get some benefits, and that's related mostly to access to their early builds before they release them to public. And that's to also point out that at the time of recording, Obsidian is officially in beta, but it's pretty amazing what it already has, and it's kind of being added to, it feels like, almost on a practically daily basis. So yeah, there's cost. It's much cheaper because for pretty much most people's cases, it's free. They do have some paid services on top, such as syncing. I'll go into that in another. Again, these are all just optional. You don't need these at all, and there are things that you can do without to get the same kind of features as these from your kind of own services that you may already be using anyway. So I will touch upon sync as an example. Now, I am paying for the sync service because I wanted to try it out with Obsidian. But I also use Dropbox because I'm already using Dropbox. I may use a different cloud service at some point, but it's something I'm already using. So I didn't have to pay for the Obsidian Sync service. I just wanted to see how it worked and how efficient it was. And it's not great with gigantic files, but then that's why Dropbox is great. And you may be thinking about, well, why do I have gigantic files in my note-taking or notes kind of data store? And I'll get into that because I'm choosing it as like a whole life system and organization of all my files eventually. So I do have like video files within the structure and things, and they can all be easily synced in Dropbox. So service I'm already using. They have a publish add-on as well if you want to make them your pages publicly viewable. So perfectly reasonable for them to charge for this because it'll cost them on the back end to run the servers for those things. And that's basically why the cost is low with the actual tool itself, of it being free, aside from supporting developers, is that there's no server costs involved other than simply downloading the tool. Unlike Notion and Roam Research, they have their own server infrastructure to maintain because they're mostly really just web-based tools. Whereas that's the main difference with Obsidian, is very much a locally based tool in which you can add syncing if you want to. So related to syncing, and whether you choose to have any syncing even, is security. The security of Obsidian is basically as secure as you want it to be. So you could just have it offline only on a single device. Obviously, you'd want to have backup systems in place, or maybe you don't. Maybe if you're more concerned about higher levels of security than having the information itself retrievable, then you can do that. There's no reason you have to sync. Obsidian's own syncing service is end-to-end encryption. I have no insight into how well they've implemented their security, but if it's truly end-to-end encryption, that's hopefully as secure as you can get as far as encryption, rather than encryption on the server, which I believe Notion and Roam Research, this is kind of where they fall down a bit on their security. I think most people advise you not to put sensitive or very private information in Roam or Notion, for the very fact that there isn't really any encryption as far as I'm aware, and certainly not end-to-end encryption. But it's even with encryption, it's going to be on their servers, and with Obsidian, that's totally up to you. You can put the information exactly where you want. So, as I say, it can be as secure as you want it to be. You can have your entire data set, so the Obsidian Vault, inside some kind of encrypted container on a hard drive, maybe even held on an external hard drive or a thumb drive even. It's literally anywhere you want it to be and as secure as you want it to be. There's many levels of security that you want, and as accessible or not accessible as you want. Ultimately, this is just about text files, so you can do whatever you want as you would be able to do with kind of any text file. So that pretty much covers it. I don't want to go into any further details on security. If you want to learn more, you can do about that, but there's no way that any kind of web-based service like Roam Research or Notion can come close ever to competing with level of security of Obsidian, just because you have control over that security and you can make it far more secure or less secure exactly as you feel fit. So next thing is what I think I'd call robustness, and that's again goes back to the fact that this is offline, local first, and don't be put off by me saying offline that you can't access this from other devices. Again, it's the fact that you can have these features as you want them or need them, whereas this is a limitation of a lot of other apps, is that you have no control over that. There's a base level that you can't go below. So everything with Obsidian starts off offline and local, and then you can add on services, which brings about the robustness of any kind of server outage that you may have won't affect access to your files immediately. This is something that these web-based services such as Roam and Notion and many others, because they're server first, if their service goes down, quite often you just simply can't access your data. I know they're working on making better offline access to your files, but this is kind of adding it the other way around, server first and then adding offline access, and it's never going to be quite as good. And you'll always find there are issues in ensuring that you have the latest information in your database, because it will always treat the server base as the kind of most important center of your information, as opposed to Obsidian, where it's kind of the central most important place is exactly where you're working on the information, as opposed to remotely accessing it. And along with that, robustness means that accessing that information is always going to be faster with Obsidian. Even though there may be debates on how fast the Obsidian tool is, the app, because it's an Electron app, which there are lots of people who have opinions on Electron apps because they're not all. It's kind of a cross-platform way of creating an app that's it's not always the most efficient, but it's pretty fast, and really the only limitation is on how fast the device you're working with is. Whereas again, with any kind of server-based data app, your limitation is going to mostly not only just be about the app itself, but also the limitation of the speed of their servers and how fast they're sending information. Which, in addition to, which then brings into considerations of your internet speed, whether you have access to internet at any particular time as well, or your network. It just adds multiple levels in between you and your data that is always going to introduce possible speed issues. And like the thing with robustness is, if the service goes down, then you can't access your data, or you have very limited use of your data. With Obsidian, they have their own sync service. If this went down, if you're solely relying on this, then you're basically in the same position. But I mean, if you're using your own sync services as well, you have more flexibility there. And like I said, if you have a main device that you're using your data on, as long as you have access to your devices, then you don't lose access to your data. So that's where this kind of robustness comes in, is that you always have access to your data. If Obsidian went away, you still have access to your data. There's no need to export or anything. The data's already there. This is basically so that comes onto flexibility, which is my next reason, is because we have this underlying architecture of it just being a collection of folders and files, and specifically text files. You can do anything you want to those in exactly the same way, with or without Obsidian. So, like I said, Obsidian uses that as its base, but it's like a level on top of it. Obsidian, it doesn't quite have a public API. If you don't understand that, it's not something to worry about. It's something a lot of the other services, some of the very much older services like Evernote, kind of have a public API, and Notion and I think Roam, at the time of recording, are working on making a public API, which is just a way for other programs to talk to that program. But it almost doesn't matter, because the Obsidian tool they've basically opened up to allowing plugins from the community to just create whatever plugin you want. And there's already a huge amount. So community plugins, if I go to browse, if something is not built into Obsidian, there's so many people already working on plugins for features and tool sets that they want to see in Obsidian and created these plugins to do that. So if you don't find something is already in Obsidian, there may already be a plugin that you can actually just install and use with that. So it's completely extensible. If you know any programming, you can therefore create your own plugins. Now, the thing I want to emphasize is that this is about kind of extending Obsidian and making Obsidian better. But that's just kind of one level of flexibility, and it's the flexibility of Obsidian. But it's the fact that Obsidian uses text files underneath these markdown files is that the flexibility goes beyond Obsidian or below Obsidian, in that you can do anything you want to those text files with or without Obsidian. So completely ignoring Obsidian, anything that you can do with a text file or collection of files, you can do with your Obsidian Vault, basically. And in terms of flexibility, that's about as flexible as it gets with anything in computing. Is just plain text files and just do what you want with them, basically. So you can create your own tools on top of this, which is what goes back to the future-proofing, is that you'll always have these files that you can manipulate or present in any way you want. If the Obsidian tool goes away, you can use any other kind of tool that will present text files, or just simply access and edit the text files manually with any kind of text editor that exists on all computers by default. So, and if you're into programming, not only can you create Obsidian plugins, but you can create your own programs and tools, and which is why if Obsidian went away for some reason, anyone else can just create something similar if they just put in the time into it, basically. And that's all it is just this goes as far as you want it to go. So the trade-off, of course, is convenience. If there isn't something built in, or there isn't something that exists that you actually want, then you do have to create it yourself. So there's a lot of features and feature sets, maybe in Notion, and the way that Notion is presented can be very pretty, and that's a lot harder to achieve, or certainly there's more work to be done in configuring things yourself to do that in Obsidian. And of course, if Obsidian went away, you'd have to create something from scratch or hope someone else came up with something for that. But the trade-off there is you're kind of starting almost at a lower point of feature sets, especially because there's far fewer resources being put into Obsidian development. I think it's just a 2-person development team, aside from the community plugins. So you're starting off with a kind of a lower level, which is why it's probably easier to go to Obsidian from another tool, so you kind of have some familiarity with what you actually want from these tools and looking how to set them up in a way that you're used to working. Of course, the downside to that is that you may also then become accustomed in the other tools to things that you can't get working in through Obsidian or some other means. But the main thing is whatever level of base features that you get with Notion, Evernote, and Room Research, is there's also an upper limit. You're limited by whatever features they provide. Even with any kind of open API, that also depends on how flexible their API is and how deeply that can interact inside their data stores, and also with apps externally, and you're relying on apps being built that will talk to the API, their API. But for the most part, you're just limited by whatever features they give you, and waiting for the features to roll out for whatever you want, and may never come. And if you wanted to take it yourself further, you can't, basically. And so you're starting off at maybe a better level, which is easier for new users with these other tools than Obsidian, although Obsidian's adding new features all the time as well and making it easier. But they don't have that upper limit in Obsidian. As I said, pretty much anything you can imagine you can do with any computer or computer device, you can do with at least the data that Obsidian uses, because it's just there as local files. So that was my other reason, is that there was far greater potential there with the have control over your data. So that was the other thing, was like I have control over my own data now, and I don't feel any anxiety or issues when a service goes down because my data's still there. Quite often I see about these different services going down, and it was another reason that I actually looked into this as well, was getting more into kind of self-hosting and not relying on access to my data being through a third party, and that's basically it. That covers security as well. Lots of examples of people being kind of locked out of Google accounts and that kind of thing, which might not necessarily relate to Notion, but or Roam Research. But if you log in via your Google account and you no longer have access to your Google accounts, then it's sort of related. But just by the services themselves, if there was some reason that you got locked out of your account or something, you basically lose access to your data. So yeah, it's that kind of like loss of control over your data, your own security, and how you want your system to work. And developing your own system, quite intimidating to begin with, which is why it kind of takes steps, and it takes small steps to start and then build upon. And maybe the benefit of some of these other tools is kind of getting an idea with the features that you presented of what actually does and doesn't work for you, without just starting with a blank slate. And so there is that advantage. That the disadvantage here is that you are kind of like starting with nothing, basically. But those other tools can be intimidating as well, especially with some of comparing yourself to more advanced users that kind of have these almost crazy high-level systems, which, as long as they're not taking too much maintenance, are great. But you can get there as well with Obsidian, and like I said, you're also then not limited by what the feature sets of those tools are. You're only limited by basically your imagination, or even other people's imaginations. Get ideas from other people. So those are basically my main reasons. It's just ultimately down to kind of every aspect you can think of. There are disadvantages to Obsidian, but I think the advantages far outweigh, and I disagree with some people saying that none of these tools are kind of future-proof and you may want to change. This is why I disagree, because I think Obsidian doesn't fall into that category. It is special because it's not about Obsidian, the tool, and people miss that point. It's about the fact it's the tool and the data, and the way they've chosen to handle data. And the way they've chosen to do that is to give you the data to begin with. And it's built around your data. as opposed to you building your data around the tool. And that's what makes it future-proof, because it's not about the future of the tool. The tool can go away, but you can also just substitute in almost any tool that's likewise kind of more open and accessible to using your own data and underlying data. The fact that a lot of these other tools will export to things like Markdown and text shows you the usefulness, but because they're giving you the information that in a way that they want you to be able to access without a tool. And that is in most circumstances, the data formats that they give it to you in is the actual data formats that Obsidian actually uses for working with. So like I said, there's no kind of exports needed from Obsidian at all. It can just stop. The data's still there. So yeah, that's basically the reasons why I think you should stick with Obsidian, or at the very least approach the same kind of design paradigm of using data files first and just finding things or building your own things to work with that data. And data, in this case, just being your own files, and the overriding information, or the higher level information, just being markdown files, which is just text files with different characters for formatting. And I'll do a video specifically on the markdown. So that's it from me today, and don't forget to subscribe and click that bell for notifications for when I come up with new videos.